And Stu, let's do exits, shall we? Because with new signings must come exits. And clearly there's rules around loans and squad sizes and age of players. Do you want to just quickly run over those before we talk about potential actual names that might be heading out the window?
Okay, I'll quickly start with loans because you mentioned it there as a bit of confusion as to how many loans you can have. There is a cap on 2 domestic loans. That is, domestic is essentially from other Premier League clubs, but any club in the English pyramid, doesn't include Scotland, by the way. Ipswich have one of those at the moment in Calvin Phillips from Manchester City. So they have space to do one more. Obviously, the 2 other loans, Godfrey from Atalanta and Kayusta from Napoli, are international loans. So you can have, I think, 6 of those under FIFA rules on top of your domestic loans. So still some wriggle room there if they wanted to look abroad for a loan. You can't have 2 players on loan from the same English club. So we've just mentioned Mr. McAtee at Manchester City. So if they wanted him, they would have to buy him and not loan him. So that is the loan situation. Squad rules, 25-man senior squad. So senior does a lot of heavy lifting there. Players are, I think it's under 21, but the definition is born on or after January 1st, 2003. For this season. Ipswich have a couple of those at the moment in Delap and Hutchinson that don't have to be registered for the 25. Godfrey coming in takes them up to 26. Philogene would take them up to 27. So already we're talking about having to move 2 players out to accommodate those 2. Ogbene is an obvious one, out for the season with that Achilles injury, so they can just deregister him. Obviously, they'll still hope that he's got a longer-term future, but for the time being, they can just deregister him. Ali Al-Hamadi, who I've already touched upon, would seem like he's an obvious one to go out on loan to a championship club and continue his development. But if there's 2 more to come on top of that, and that's what we're talking about, a right winger and a striker, there's obviously still some jiggery-pokery that needs to be done to accommodate them. Doak, as Alex has mentioned, would fall in the underage category, so you wouldn't have to worry about that if it were to be him. If it was a senior striker that was come in, you still got to find 1 more to leave from that squad, and that's becoming increasingly difficult to find where that person would come from. But there's some options.
Yeah, let's talk about those options now then, Stu. So we're looking at, as you coined it this morning, potentially some promotion heroes departing, which would obviously be sad to see. But in terms of names, I guess let's start with Harry Clark, because he's the one that's been linked with a move to Sheffield Wednesday by the Sheffield Star yesterday, actually. So do you want to talk a little bit about Harry Clark in terms of the pecking order and how Town are looking? It does make sense, doesn't it? It does seem feasible.
Yeah, I think he's the most obvious one of this list that we're going to go through here, purely by virtue of the fact that he's already found game time limited in the Premier League with Axel Tuanzebe at the start of the season, Ben Johnson. They've kind of been vying for the right back role. Then since the switch to a back 3, Burns and Johnson have kind of played the right wing back role. Godfrey in now as well, so he's sort of down the pecking order for a couple of positions there really at the moment. 2 years on since he returned from Arsenal for £1 million, due to be out of contract in the summer, although Ipswich have the option to extend that by 12 months, so he's protected as an asset in that regard. But looking at where players could move on, I would imagine Harry was probably towards the top of that conversation. Obviously would be a sad one to see leave, because he's an Ipswich boy and he's got the fist pump, and you know, he was leading the party scenes following promotion. Plays with his heart on his sleeve, but no room for sentiment in this game, I guess. Football stands still for no one, and you know, just as it was sad to see quite a few players leave last summer, I think we're going to be in a similar situation this month, whether it be Harry Clark or another.
Right, let's stick with defenders, because these would both be like a knife in the heart and something of a surprise. But in your piece, you also mention Cameron Burgess, who's obviously been extremely impressive when he's had the opportunity to play this season, and also, more poignantly, Ipswich lad, currently starting, Luke Wolfenden, Stu.
Yeah, well, the only reason I've mentioned these 2 is that they're both out of contract in the summer, and there's been no mention of extension options in those 2 deals. Both a surprise, as you say, because Cameron Burgess has continued to surprise us and everyone with how well he keeps adapting to new levels. Outstanding against Bournemouth recently with that man in the match display, and had a nice little run in the side, although Jacob Greaves is back in the team now. Wolfie's obviously started the last 3 games and at the heart of the back 3 and has looked good in those games. There's obviously a feeling that Jacob Greaves is the man for the future. So that would come into thinking with Cameron Burgess. And with Luke Wolfenden, he's a homegrown player, and homegrown players are worth their weight in gold under PSR because they count as pure profit. And that's why you're seeing the likes of Man United reportedly considering cashing in on someone like Mainu or Garnacho at the moment, because it makes a big difference to the books, essentially. And we've just talked a little bit about Ipswich potentially pushing themselves to the limit with PSR. So that would be the reasoning behind letting Wolfie go. I note that TWTD have said that there's interest from Sheffield United in him at the top end of the Championship at the moment. So, Harry Clark and Luke Wolfenden, 2 Ipswich boys. And, we're talking about clubs being interested in them and whether their time is coming towards its end. I sincerely hope not, especially with Luke, because, weirdly feel a little bit of an affinity with him because I feel like he's been on the ride with us all through the darkest of times in League One, and I've loved the way that he's come back from some pretty low points and come back and always been ready when called upon, and no more so than recently. So, but he has to be part of this conversation for the reasons that I've just outlined.